In 1973, 5 Icelandic fishermen did something that sounds insane. They grabbed 13 sheep, loaded them onto a boat, and dumped them on Surtsey Pals, a volcanic island, so new it was literally still smoking. Then they sailed away and left them there to die. Except the sheep didn't die. And what happened next turned into one of the strangest ecological experiments ever conducted. One that would make scientists question everything they thought they knew about how life colonizes new worlds. But before we get to the sheep's revenge plot, we need to talk about how this island even exists. Because Surtsey shouldn't be here. And the story of its birth is almost as wild as what those fishermen did to it. November 14, 1963, a fishing crew off the southern coast of Iceland noticed something weird. The ocean was boiling, not like a hot spring. Like the planet was having a seizure. The eruption lasted 3.5 years. 3.5 years of the Earth just vomiting rock and ash into the ocean. Scientists lost their minds. This was their chance to watch something that usually takes thousands of years. How does life colonize a completely barren landscape? What shows up first? What comes next? It's like someone hit the reset button on evolution and handed them front-row tickets. Iceland immediately declared Surtsey a nature reserve. No tourists, no construction. No human interference whatsoever. Only a handful of scientists with special permits could even set foot on the island. The rules were strict. Ridiculously strict. Scientists had to scrub their boots. They couldn't bring any organic material. They basically had to treat the island like it was made of glass. The first visitor, a fly, showed up less than a year after the eruption stopped. Just one fly, probably blown there by wind, probably very confused. Then came the seeds. Seabirds flying overhead would drop their lunch. Ocean currents would wash up seaweed with seeds tangled inside. Within a few years, the first plant poked through the volcanic gravel. A sea rocket, if you're curious. Nothing fancy, but it was alive. And it was the beginning of something remarkable. By 1970, Surtsey was slowly turning green. Moss crept across the rocks. Seabirds started nesting. Scientists were documenting everything with the intensity of people watching paint dry. Except this paint was way more interesting, because it was alive and evolving. Everything was going according to plan. A natural, pristine experiment in ecological succession. Science in its purest form. And then 5 fishermen decided to ruin everything by introducing livestock. It's 1973. 10 years after the island burst out of the ocean. The eruptions have stopped. The scientists are busy taking notes and measuring things. And these 5 fishermen, whose names have unfortunately been lost to history, probably sitting around with too much time and not enough common sense, decided it would be hilarious to see what would happen if they put sheep on this brand new island. To be clear, this wasn't some official experiment. This wasn't sanctioned by anyone. This was just 5 guys with access to a boat, and apparently zero understanding of how ecological research works. They grabbed 13 sheep, sailed out to Surtsey, unloaded them onto the volcanic rocks, and left. Just left. Like dropping your kid off at soccer practice, except the soccer field is a barren volcanic island, with no grass and no water and no chance of survival. The scientific community was furious, absolutely livid. Do you know how hard it is to maintain a pristine natural laboratory? Do you know how many protocols exist to prevent exactly this kind of contamination? And these fishermen just waltzed in and dumped 13 woolly chaos agents onto the most carefully monitored island on Earth. But here's where it gets interesting. Because everyone assumed the sheep would die within days. Maybe a week if they were tough. The island had some moss, sure, and a few scattered plants, but nothing substantial, nothing that could sustain 13 grazing animals. The general consensus was that the sheep would starve, the scientists would document it, and life would go on. The sheep had other plans. Now, Icelandic sheep aren't your average fluffy farm animals. These things are descended from the sheep Vikings brought over 1,000 years ago. They're small, they're incredibly hardy, and they've spent centuries learning how to survive in one of the most inhospitable environments on the planet. Iceland is basically a frozen volcanic rock, with delusions of being a country. If sheep can make it there, they can make it anywhere. And Surtsey was a cakewalk compared to an Icelandic winter. The sheep immediately did what sheep do best. They started eating everything. The moss scientists had been carefully monitoring, gone. The small plants trying to establish themselves? Devoured. The seabirds' nesting areas? Trampled. These sheep moved across the island like tiny adorable locusts with wool. But they didn't just eat the plants. They changed the entire trajectory of the island's ecosystem. See? Sheep, poop. Shocking. I know. But that poop was suddenly introducing massive amounts of organic material and nutrients onto an island that previously had almost none. Sheep poop is basically fertilizer. Rich, nitrogen-heavy fertilizer. Where the sheep grazed and pooped, new plants started growing. Different plants. Faster-growing plants. Plants that could handle disturbed soil and heavy nutrients. The ecological succession that scientists expected to take decades suddenly kicked into overdrive in certain areas. But it wasn't the natural succession anymore. It was sheep-accelerated succession. The scientists were documenting all of this with a mix of fascination and horror. On one hand, this was scientifically valuable data about how introduced species can completely alter an ecosystem. On the other hand, their pristine experiment was now contaminated by rogue livestock. Some of the sheep started to struggle. Food was scarce in winter. Water was a problem. Several died in the first year. Scientists watching from the mainland figured the population would crash and the island would return to normal. Natural selection would handle the problem. But the survivors adapted. They learned to lick dew off rocks. They figured out which plants were worth eating and which areas of the island had better grazing. They found shelter in volcanic crevices during storms. These sheep were pulling off survival skills that would make Bear Grylls take notes. By 1974, something unexpected happened. Some of the sheep were still alive. Not just alive, but seemingly healthy. They'd made it through an entire winter on an island that wasn't supposed to support them. The scientific community was baffled. How? The answer came down to seabirds. Surtsey had become a major nesting site for gulls, puffins, and other seabirds. These birds were bringing fish back to the island to feed their chicks. Some of that fish was dropping onto the ground, decomposing, adding even more nutrients to the soil. The sheep were essentially benefiting from a buffet of bird-delivered nitrogen. Plus, the birds themselves were pooping everywhere. Bird guano is incredibly rich in nutrients. Combined with sheep manure, Surtsey's soil was getting a turbocharged injection of organic material that would normally take centuries to accumulate naturally. The vegetation exploded. Not the slow, careful succession scientists expected, but rapid, chaotic growth. New species of plants were arriving faster than anyone predicted. Some blown in by wind, some carried by birds, some washing up on shore. But now they had soil to grow in. Real soil, created by the combined efforts of decomposing organic matter, volcanic minerals, bird poop, and sheep poop. The island was transforming, and the sheep were at the center of it. Researchers started visiting more frequently, trying to document this unplanned experiment. They tagged some of the sheep to track their movements. They analyzed the plant communities in grazed versus ungrazed areas. The differences were stark. Where sheep grazed heavily, you got tough, fast-growing grasses and weeds. Where they didn't graze, you got slower succession with mosses and lichens. By the late 1970s, the sheep population had stabilized at around 8 to 10 individuals. Not thriving exactly, but persisting, surviving, making it work against all odds on an island that was never supposed to support them. The scientific papers started rolling out. Ecologists were studying the Surtsey sheep as a case study in island biogeography, invasive species dynamics, and ecosystem engineering. Ecosystem engineers. They weren't just living on the island, they were actively reshaping it. Some scientists argued that the sheep should be removed, that they were corrupting the natural experiment. That Surtsey's value as a research site was compromised as long as livestock were trampling around changing everything. The purists wanted the island returned to its pristine, sheep-free state. Others argued the opposite, that removing them would be just as much interference as introducing them was in the first place. That the experiment had evolved into something different but equally valuable, a study of how human-introduced species can reshape brand-new ecosystems. The debate raged in academic circles while the sheep continued doing sheep things. Eating, pooping, reproducing, surviving. Then something else started happening. Other animals began colonizing the island in greater numbers. Insects that fed on the sheep enhanced vegetation. Spiders that fed on the insects. More bird species attracted by the increasing plant diversity. A real functioning ecosystem. Was it the ecosystem scientists originally wanted to study? No. Was it scientifically fascinating anyway? Absolutely. By the 1980s, the sheep population finally started to decline. The island's resources could only support so many animals. The population would boom, then crash, then stabilize again. Classic island population dynamics. Scientists studying the island noticed something remarkable. The areas where sheep had grazed most heavily now had different soil composition than the rest of the island. Thicker, richer, more organic content. The sheep had, in just a decade, created soil conditions that would normally take 50 to 100 years to develop naturally. They'd also changed which plants could grow where. Some species that probably would have colonized the island naturally were now outcompeted by sheep-favored plants. Other species that might never have established themselves found perfect conditions in the disturbed, nutrient-rich soil the sheep created. The last confirmed sighting of sheep on Surtsey was in the early 1980s. By then, the population had dwindled to just a few individuals. Eventually, they died off. The harsh winters limited food during lean years, and small population size made long-term survival impossible. But their impact remained. Decades after the last sheep died, scientists could still identify which areas of the island had been heavily grazed. The vegetation patterns were different. The soil was different. The entire ecological trajectory of those sections had been permanently altered by a decade of sheep activity. Today, Surtsey is still a protected research site, still off-limits to tourists. Scientists still visit regularly to document how the island's ecosystem develops, and they still argue about what the sheep episode means. Some view it as a cautionary tale about human interference, a reminder that even well-intentioned or stupid actions can have cascading effects on delicate ecosystems. The island's value as a pristine natural laboratory was compromised, and we can never know what Surtsey's ecology would have looked like without those 13 sheep. Others see it as an incredible natural experiment in ecological resilience and adaptation. The sheep didn't destroy the island. They changed it, sure, but life adapted. The ecosystem reorganized around their presence, and then reorganized again after they disappeared. It demonstrated how robust and flexible natural systems can be, even on a brand new volcanic island. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. The sheep definitely altered Surtsey's ecological development in ways that can never be undone, but they also provided scientists with invaluable data about island colonization, species interactions, and ecosystem development under unusual conditions. What's really fascinating is that Surtsey itself is slowly disappearing. Without ongoing volcanic activity to replenish it, the island is eroding. Wave action and weather are grinding it down. Scientists estimate that within a few centuries, Surtsey might shrink to a fraction of its current size or disappear entirely beneath the waves. So in a weird way, the sheep controversy might become a footnote in the island's relatively short geological lifespan. The whole island is temporary. The ecosystems developing on it are temporary. The sheep were temporary. Everything about Surtsey is temporary, but the lessons learned are permanent. We now understand better how quickly life can colonize new territory, how introduced species can reshape ecosystems, how resilient nature can be in the face of disruption, how complex the interactions between plants, animals, soil, and nutrients really are. And we learned that Icelandic sheep are tougher than anyone gave them credit for. Those 5 fishermen accidentally created one of the most interesting ecological case studies of the 20th century. Not because they were clever or scientific, but because they were reckless and those sheep refused to die on schedule. The island that wasn't supposed to exist got colonized by sheep that weren't supposed to survive. And together, they created an ecosystem that wasn't supposed to happen. Sometimes the universe has a weird sense of humor. The next time someone tells you that nature always follows predictable patterns, remember Surtsey. Remember 13 sheep on a volcanic rock who looked at impossible odds and said, "Nah, we're good." Remember that life finds a way even when that way involves sheep poop and seabird guano creating soil where none existed before. Science is at its best when nature throws curveballs. And those 5 fishermen threw the most unexpected curveball of all, a woolly one that grazed its way into ecological history.